So the first is, and this is more about how when you get started, what the role is, and that's really setting your roadmap and priorities effectively. And much of this is around like setting yourself up for success. So we really talk about sort of 5 different scopes of your initiative. The first is your framework and how much of that you implement in terms of your overall formal stewardship, the consolidated knowledge base to store all the information, workflows and processes for managing different types of requests and activity that are data governance related. The second is the different content, the data governance content that you would do, or you're talking about business glossary, data system catalog, data request, data processing catalog type stuff, quality, reference data, all these different things. The organizational scope, are you doing this across every part of your organization, or are you starting just in areas like finance or HR or advancement or something? Even within those scopes, those organizational scopes, what's the data system and tool scope? We're going to be, focusing primarily on like a newly implementing data warehouse and maybe 1 or 2 source systems, or are you going to be focusing on all the systems in that area? Maybe people use different sets of reporting tools, or you're going to incorporate all of that. And then even within that, the next area is what are the what specific stakeholders are involved? Like, do you have enough stewards here? Do you not? Or you have only a subset of people? So a big part is like picking and selecting who those folks are. The second responsibility, and this is also somewhat about the start of the process, but it is an ongoing thing, is getting leadership buy-in and commitment. So this can include financial support, resource prioritization, endorsement for this activity, governance, and the data management, data intelligence, whatever you want to call it. This type of activity, it requires human manpower, and in some cases financial investment in tools and things like that. And it's important to get the support for that, particularly in the human manpower. As we'll talk about, you're going to be doing training and support and facilitating of your stewards in doing these activities. And if they're not empowered to do this work, and if they haven't been told that doing this work is a priority for them, and given time in their week or month to do this type of work, then you're not going to have success. So it is part of the job of this group to make sure that you've got from leadership enough buy-in and support so that the people doing this work can get it done and sort of respect the effort that they're going to have to do with the governance in general. Part of doing that is sharing actionable goals with leadership, and this is something that we talked about a lot in our snack size DG session number 1 on assessing your environment and really identifying what the goals are. And it's important when you're talking to leadership not to talk specifically about kind of goals around data governance activity. That's sort of navel gazing, and kind of meta, like, oh, our goal is to define 1,000 business glossary definitions. Like, that is a reasonable data governance activity metric to set, but it is not something that shows return and value to your organization. Like, doing that will do what? Create trust, better understanding, faster turnaround in reports, save money in X, Y, and Z. Those are the types of high-level actionable goals that you want to talk about. So communicate, like, if we do these things, we're going to get this value. So this is a sort of a setup getting that buy-in. Right, the next thing of this group is determining your steward roles and the people within them. Maybe you're not making the exact assignments of the people. Maybe you're sort of asking other people to, other managers to recommend folks or whatever. But you're working on that assignment. So it's important to really only try to bring in those people when they're ready. Which, as you'll see later, one of the responsibilities is making sure that people are ready when their time comes. Part of this is building this sort of steward matrix, saying what are the different types of activity, content, functional areas, systems, things like that, and what roles are responsible for that, and then who is in that role. We discussed that in our pragmatic data governance and the role of data steward session, number 18. We've also discussed a little bit of that in our and snack size roles and data governance session. But we have some matrices that you can use to kind of to build on for defining your stewardship. And by the way, when I talk about stewardship, it's that doesn't have to be like a single layer. It's just kind of a catch-all term. your stewards you can have technical stewards and functional stewards, and you can have, policy folks, and you can have multi-level things. We do recommend making it as simple as possible, but that's a general term here I'm talking about. When defining that, understand that it may require some job description changes. Some people, if your organization is one where people say, that's not in my job description, I'm not going to do that, it's not a priority for me, then you may have to go back, as we just said, to leadership and get some buy-in and say, hey, we're going to write into this job description, or give you another job description and have some sort of, bump up for them, or whatever is necessary for being in that role. Now, here's the important thing, and this is something that people don't necessarily think of, but I think it's critical, is that one of your responsibilities in the leadership here is serving as backup or acting stewards, right? And you may or may not have the precise, the exact expertise to solve whatever question's coming up, but it is a common situation, and you want to allow for this, that questions are going to come up, issues are going to come up, requests are going to come through that you don't yet have a steward assigned for, right? You don't have a role, you don't have that content, and you want to be able to create that content. You want to have the process of intake of those requests or questions or processes to work, and that might mean that you have to sort of, where there isn't sort of routing to a person who is not ready in the steward role, or maybe a routing to a steward role that's empty and they get no response. I recommend putting the committee, this leadership group, as the recipient of, or the actor in those unfilled spots. And it comes to you, then you can then go and try to find the right person. That might include, recruiting an appropriate subject matter expert at that moment in time, or just going ahead and taking the best guess that you can. But in my opinion, that's better than just having no response or not engaging in governance. So it can be a very powerful approach, and it helps you sort of get things done while avoiding the revolt that you get from sending something to a steward that isn't available or isn't bought into what you're trying to do. And as I mentioned, keeps the process working. So consider that an option of creating yourself as a backup or acting steward, yourself or the group that is these leadership. All right, the other important role, and this is more of a startup role, but it is ongoing as you expand, is to defining the classification and other sort of data governance coding standards that you have. So if you're going to ask people to put security classifications on things, or privacy codes on things, or data lifecycle statuses on things, or they're going to say what tools this uses or whatever, defining those classifications and letting people understand what they mean is important. The other thing is what we call reaching a content tipping point. And so when you're starting the project, you want to get as much stuff in as you can with sort of what exists already, or what you can do with your core team, so that when you start expanding to sort of the second level of stewards, people who aren't part of your leadership group, or your very active, enthusiastic early adopters of this, that they're not coming into kind of an empty repository and an empty process. They're going to see good examples and good templates and find other content that's there. So getting to that content tipping point is an important thing. And we talk about that in some of our other getting started with data governance processes. But pushing for that is important. Another way to do that is to facilitate certain processes of automation, right? So regardless of what tools you use, there's certain content that you can generate automatically. It doesn't require human brain power and collaboration. So a lot of that can be catalog information. With the right tools, you can import in full data models, you can bring things in from the community, you can support all sorts of things. So that's an ongoing effort to continue to try to facilitate automation and make sure that you've got as much content in as possible. One of the things that we recommend if you're starting is to pick maybe 10 to 20 mission critical reports that you do within your organization, and document those really well, and all of the business glossary definitions that come off of that, and sort of the systems that are related to that, as good models for how the whole process works with other people coming in for content. The next role of this leadership group is to train stewards and other DG participants. Okay, so you want to train both not just in sort of the process of doing their stewardship roles, but definitely not just in the tools, right? You want to talk about what are the goals, why are we doing this? The same things you're talking to leadership about. Talk to talk to these members about so they understand the value of what they're doing and get their buy-in. Buy-in is more important than understanding the tool. Like if they're bought in, they're going to ask you if they have a question about how to use the tool. If they know how to tool it really well, but they're not bought in, they're not going to do anything, right? So, but train in their goals, train in the processes that you've set up, what their expectations are for them as a steward, and the tools that you want them to use as part of that process. Again, focus on those high-level goals, and then you want to support the steward activity through, making sure that those people who are stewards, what I guess what I'm trying to say here is that with this bullet is when you're training everyone, you want to put a big focus on the stewards because they're really critical, and to make sure that they understand what they're supposed to be doing during approval review process, if that's what they're being asked to do, which is one part of stewardship. Someone has created a definition and they need to review and approve it or reject it. Another thing is that someone needs a definition and it's getting routed to them for authoring, right? Subject matter expertise. And the other thing of training is in training your broader community on these data governance entry points. One of the things we talk about, if you go to our just-in-time data governance session that we did, is talking about you kind of want to figure out how to insert governance into your day-to-day activities. So if someone has a request for a new report, or someone sees a problem with data or whatever, however they're reporting that now, to insert in data governance as a process. So if that requires a slight change in the way they do things, that's great. Or maybe you've got people right now who are seeing issues with data and have no current entry point to report that, right? That would be a very valuable thing to go do training on your community. Like, all right, anyone who gets a report and doesn't understand it or sees a problem with the data or sees an issue, this is how you report that problem. So getting that out there. Another thing is part of this training, it's helpful to set standards, goals, expectations for your stewards or other people involved in governance activity for stuff like, how long should it take you to respond to, to approve something, or even some gamification of this to say, like, we want each department that's doing this to get, 50 reports or something. And, I'm not a big fan of just doing things to do things. I think you should do things like have the questions and problems in your organization drive the content. But, it's really good to kind of set goals and measure that and make sure that people are working towards it for the activity. And those goals around the activity should also, of course, feed the goals of the overall governance process, like more trust in the data and better use. And so training is a critical part. And just because I'm saying that the committee themselves should do that, like it may be that you've got a sort of documentation and training folks within your organization that you can task with doing that, but it's your responsibility to make sure that this is getting done effectively. And the critical thing is to not assume that just because you've assigned someone the role of a steward that they're going to happily do it. You have to make sure they're well trained. All right, one effective way to do this, and I think this is a really valuable thing, is to have certain people within this leadership group that will review content of new stewards. So you can, depending on what tools you use, you can sort of insert a non-required or required step in the review process for new content, like a new glossary definition or new report spec, or even if it's like a data quality issue process, so that you can go in and look at and say, like, oh, is this definition well written? Does it have full full specificity? Is it sort of match our standards for how they're supposed to do that? And it's difficult to do this politically, but I think most of us are capable of sort of structuring something as supportive and constructive feedback, as opposed to, kind of like dictatorial oversight, right? So you really kind of only want to do that until you feel like they've got it, and then you can stop it. It's an incredibly valuable thing to do up front. And particularly if you can maybe do edits and show them what to do instead of just kicking it back and saying no, right? That's not very helpful. All right, the next sort of ongoing step, and this becomes one of the most important things once you're kind of in the, down the road in governance, is to monitor the requests and DG activity. So, people who are, again, the types of things like quality issues or new definitions or new report specs or, changes or policy, whatever it might be that's sort of flowing through the process. And there's sort of three different perspectives, right? The first is to help ensure timely responses for requests. So take the customer service perspective of, there was a person who has requested a new report, and if you can sort of see if something sort of stuck in the process, not complete, right? And the important reason to do this, first of all, like, it helps get things out in your organization that people need, but broader buy-in for this whole data governance initiative will erode if the response is not timely, right? If they feel like, I asked for this process and it's been stuck in review and I can't get my thing done, I'm going to stop going to ask for people to review this or to document what I'm doing because I need that report. And if it takes longer to get to me, if I go through this data governance process, I'm going to bypass it. So that's really important to provide good customer service, to give them value for it, and to do it in a timely way, or you'll lose the support of your broader community. The second is to provide support for stewards that are stuck or unsure. So this is, from the team mentoring perspective. If you go in there and look and see that something's stuck for review or stuck waiting for a definition or whatever, your stewards their buy-in will erode if they're kind of being asked to do things and they don't know what to do. When they get stuck, it's a very unhappy feeling to not know what you're supposed to do, not feel like you have the skills or training to do so. So if you can come in and find that someone is stuck, rather than just admonishing them or telling them to get it done, figure out like why they're stuck and maybe realize they need more training or examples or whatever. And then lastly, from a projects perspective or content perspective, you do need to continue moving your business and operations of your organization. So you might just need to be able to step in when you see things are stuck to move it along, right? And so that may be because you have a steward that's not getting it done, and you need to go, you have the expertise to answer that question and move it on. Then you can maybe take that content that you created and loop back with that steward and say, look, this is what I did, and this is why we did this. This is helpful, right? Another thing that you might do is that you might actually have a gap in your knowledge there or in a resource, and you were talking about you guys being a backup or acting steward. That's a good opportunity for you to go and enlist a new subject matter expert or collaborator to help you, and maybe then ultimately be able to recruit that new data steward. Another role here is to resolve collisions. So I did another session on colliding definitions. So, being basically a point of escalation for disagreements on glossary definitions, policy attribute classifications, quality rules, ownership, all that kind of stuff, right? So when you've got multiple stewards who can't agree on something, then the leadership committee can help resolve those disagreements. And it's important to remember that these differing opinions or collisions, this is a good thing, right? It is, if these weren't being surfaced, they would still exist, and they would still exist in probably bad data or misinformation or challenges. So if they're being surfaced and you can resolve them, that's great. If you look at our Managing Collision of Definitions webinar that we did a couple months ago, you'll see one of our tricks for this, it's not really a trick, I think it's one of our recommendations, is to allow for different contexts to coexist. So if you've got collisions, maybe it's just because really you're talking about different things, and they should both coexist as long as you clearly define which is which. So that's a really important role. It surprisingly doesn't happen as often as you think. People feel like that's going to be your main job, but it's not. And then finally, once you have this working, there's then to expand scope. So you can continue to expand out to, you've sort of started in this area, now let's move it to more areas in your company, more content, more systems, more people, right? Lastly, the main thing is to be a champion, right? So we talked about this training, and it kind of falls into that, but you want to have not just sort of training to get people started, but ongoing training and buy-in activities. We have some clients who've been really successful with like lunch and learns, like having sort of webinars and outreach, train the trainer activities, just to make sure that new people are informed, that the people who are there still have buy-in, that they understand why they're doing that. That if you actually have created some metrics and goals, like, hey, we want to create 50 definitions, or we want to get this kind of level of timeliness in report requests, and you can report back on how people are doing it and provide awards or bribes. Everybody loves donuts and candy or whatever. And whenever we're actually able to be in the office again and do those kinds of things, but that's really great. Some people also set up like an organizational data governance webpage, and like something either within a tool like ours or on a normal page where they're documenting like why we're doing all of this and what's going on, and just to keep people informed. And then lastly, part of this is to report back, and this is actually the second bullet, report back to your leadership on the goals that you set. So if you said the goal that you're going to have more self-service reporting, or save money in X, Y, and Z, or whatever, if you can measure that and report back to them, this is how we're doing. It's been 6 months or it's been a year. That's going to be really, really helpful.